London Real is back. I am Brian Rose. This week we have Gregory Sams in the house. This guy started it off back in the day in 1969 here in London with the first organic food store. He was selling brown rice to John and Yoko. So he has a lot to say about the whole movement in the 60s and 70s, the whole idea of what you eat would actually affect your health. Since then, he went on to create the Vegeburger, and after that, he's written two books. One is called Uncommon Sense, one is called The Son of God, and he's a very interesting guy who's kind of been there and done that. On top of all that, he's been in a wheelchair since he was 18 years old, and I don't know, this guy's got a really cool spirit about him, and it was nice to be able to tap in to someone who's seen things that happened, a while ago, and to get his perspectives on the future. So I think you really enjoy him. We've had some great feedback from the Jeff Stead episode we dropped a few days ago. Thanks so much for checking him out. If you haven't watched, he is the head of mobile learning for Qualcomm and has some interesting things to say about technology and how it's going to affect us in the future. As you know, we are sponsored by the makers of Alpha Brain. If you want to check out Alpha Brain, it's a nootropic, and it helps your brain work better, at least it helps mine. And if you go to londonreal.tv, you can click on the banner ad, and you can go to On It Labs and learn more about it. They also have the Shroom Tech Sport with the cordyceps mushroom, which is great for hard training. And of course, they got the Hemp Force protein. All brought to you by the CEO, which is Aubrey Marcus, a guy we know and know very well and respect a lot. So we're also sponsored by the guys at Audible. If you want to check out an audiobook, I'm a big fan of the Schwarzenegger autobiography, Total Recall. You can get a copy of that by going to audiblepodcast.com/London Real, and you can sign up for a free 30-day trial and get a free book. I'm going to keep this one short. We appreciate so much the feedback we've been getting from everyone out there, the tweets coming up on Facebook, all the comments on YouTube. And if you want to just do something really simple, it's just as simple as sharing this video or liking it on YouTube or putting it up on your Facebook. That makes a big difference. If you want to take it to the next level, just send me a message at info@LondonRealTV. I try to reply to as many people as I can, and let us know how you're doing. If you want to volunteer some time, there's a whole organization that makes all this happen, and it's all done behind the scenes. And if you want to learn about that or just help out, send me a message and we'll get you involved. So until then, here's Mr. Gregory Sams. Oh yeah, this is London Real. I am Brian Rose, this is Nick Gabriel, and joining us today is Mr. Gregory Sams. He is an author and a cultural change agent. He's written two books. One is called Uncommon Sense. This date is out of date. I think you'll rename that. We can get to that later. And one is called The Son of God, which Nick read 3 years ago, who was raving about it. You've got such a long CV, Gregory, it's not even funny. You invented the Vegeburger. You opened the UK's first natural food shop. So much to talk about, but first, welcome.
Okay, welcome. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. I wondered if you were familiar with a term called OG, which is what some of the gang members in LA used to call the guys that started it off back in the day, the original gangsters. And when I heard that term, that's what I thought of you first.
Well, my brother and I used to call ourselves the brown rice barons. We were the only people selling brown rice and importing and selling brown rice in this country, and we had 9 varieties of brown rice on the price list. So
you couldn't walk into a supermarket and find brown rice in this country?
You couldn't walk into a health food shop and find brown rice or sesame seeds or miso or seaweeds or hundreds of different foods. When we first took our package of natural foods to the main health food distributor, who also owned Holland & Barrett, the buyer there famously, we never let him forget it, told us, "I don't see any future for natural foods in the health food trade."
How many times has that happened in different aspects of life throughout the world in history?
I guess that's what a pioneer is, right? Someone who just has a vision and sticks to it, But I mean, now everyone takes this stuff for granted. But what was it like back in? I mean, you had a shop on All Saints Road in like '68 and
That's right.
69.
69.
And I mean, John Lennon was making posters for you and all sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, what was it like back then when you talked about health food in a country like the UK?
Well, it was great. It actually started off with a restaurant.
Okay.
And that's where John and Yoko used to come a lot. And the restaurant led to the natural food store, because people ate the food at the restaurant and they wanted to make it at home. So I opened up the shop for them to do it then. But it was the only countercultural, it was only the only restaurant in hippie London in the 60s. So a lot of people used to come down there because of that. So it was always a good buzz. And what we were doing was really trying to get across to people that what they ate affected their health. And that was a really bizarre concept. People looked at us like we were nuts. You hippie dippies, you are what you eat, give me a break. Even nutritionists, there was no concept that diet affected health other than too much sugar affected tooth decay. That was it.
Okay.
People could drink 30 cups of coffee a day. It would never be associated with insomnia. They could live on white bread and milkshakes or something, and that would never be associated with constipation. It was... Wow. So that was the hard thing, getting it across, and then we had a message about what to eat. But the first criteria was what you eat affects you.
That's incredible. There's a Bible verse that has been playing over in my head for the last 2 years. I'm not a Christian or anything, but I remember from my days as a Christian a few of the verses, and it is, "My people perish through lack of knowledge." And so many people are just not educated about nutrition, so they think when they see like the Coca-Cola poster that says, the latest campaign says open happiness, and it's got a polar bear opening Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
They think, wow, this is like going to improve my life, when it's going to have a completely detrimental effect. Yeah.
I just saw that on the way here. I said, what are they trying to say here?
Yeah, it's crazy.
But people know it's like sucrose and caffeine.
Do they though? Not everyone knows.
I guess if you just need a little trickery, I guess you just need plausible deniability, and then people will drink it. I mean, do you see something equivalent to what you were doing in '69 in today's culture, where the majority of it's just like, you guys are crazy, but you think in 30 years that people will adopt it?
It's a very good question.
I know.
He's good with those.
I mean, like, meditation comes to mind, where like I know a lot of people meditate, but most people would not try it and think there's no way sitting quietly for 20 minutes can affect my life.
Well, I think au contraire. Back in the early 60s or mid 60s, things like yoga and meditation, people had no idea of. Now there are yoga centers everywhere. There are lots of people giving reflexology, massage. When I went to get acupuncture in '69, I had to drive to Leamington Spa, just south of Coventry, to find an acupuncturist. Wow. The only one near London was in Gerrard's Cross, and he was booked up for 9 months ahead. So I've seen this huge change, and I named my first company Harmony Foods. I also had a magazine called Harmony. And harmony was not really in use in the English language. It was in the dictionary, it was referred to as an Oriental concept of balance, but it wasn't something, we were all conflict and fighting and working for stuff, but harmony wasn't part of our mindset at the time. So I've seen this enormous change going through. Things today, things like driverless cars, which horrifies me actually. People don't think that's ever going to happen, but at some point they will all be driverless, and people will think how crazy that people used to get behind the wheel of something driving 50 miles an hour. When you think of all the health and safety thing we have in our lives, being able to go out in a car seems crazy, but it does show how incredibly good we are at being responsible for ourselves in situations like that.
You mentioned John and Yoko. You just dropped their names earlier. And when I think of 1969, I think Woodstock, and I think all this time of change, but all I can do is watch it on the old movies. And I was wondering if you could take us back to what it was really like. I mean, you live in London now, so this is what, 43 years ago? Am I doing my math right?
Yeah.
And 44 years ago. What was it like? What was the vibe like? What was it like on Portobello Road? What was the city like? What was the feeling?
Well, it was all revolutionary and change. I was only 19 years old when I opened the restaurant.
Wow.
And At that age, you think 10 years is a huge span because it's half your life. And then I thought, gosh, in 10 years' time, everybody will be eating natural organic foods. It's so obvious. Now, 40-odd years later, I look back and I think, my God, we've accomplished a lot. Look at what's happened. Look at how things have changed. So that's really reassuring. But going back to your last question, two things, that we do today, which are going to, I hope we'll see absolutely bizarre 30 years from now. One is the illegalization of all drugs. Just seems so insane.
I like him already.
That that smoking cannabis or taking psychedelics is illegal throughout the world. I mean, that is so crazy. And I mean, I've got a couple of arrests myself on cannabis, and I look forward to the day, if I might tell my grandnieces, I don't have any grandchildren coming up, yes, I was there. Can you believe I was actually arrested for doing something as simple as this? The other one that is really crazy is that we spend $1 trillion a year of our money is used to buy, devices, weapons that kill us, to finance the international military and arms trade. It's just crazy what is going on there. And I really hope that we reach the day and people look back and say, my God, were they really spending all that money to kill each other?
So do you think humanity is moving towards a stage in its consciousness where war and violence against each other will just fall away?
Well, on one side, we have with the internet and the worldwide sort of connection that gives everybody. In our minds, the international borders are kind of dissolved. It used to be you'd go online and you think, wow, I'm in contact with Spain or China or Argentina. Now you don't even think where the site is. It's all one world, but we still have this huge military-industrial complex that has vested interest in wars. The governments of the world have a vested interest in war because fear is what keeps them in power. So it's balancing that across the fact that in our minds we're much more internationalized. So I really, really hope that was what my first book is about.
Was there a big anti-war, anti-Vietnam feeling in '69? And at that time, did you think war would be abolished in 10 years or 20 years?
Yeah, you did. You thought, how can this go on? It was such an obvious, crazy mistake. But 40 years later, 30-odd years later, we had the war in Iraq that, we all know there were no weapons of mass destruction. That was a set-up war. It was planned before the Twin Towers were brought down. And that sort of stuff is still going on.
Interesting. Were there protests in London for anti-war, or was that more a phenomenon in the States?
Oh, no, there was a major march on the American embassy in London. There were demonstrations, because England was involved, albeit on a lesser level.
I would love to spend a day in 1969 in London just walking around and being like, oh, shit.
Yeah, what I always think of is that Austin Powers, I don't know which one it was, but when he gets transported back to the 60s and he's just walking around and London's covered in psychedelic colors and everyone's driving like Beetles and it looked really cool. Yeah.
Was it like that, or?
It was really cool, and it was very small. I mean, everybody tended to know everybody else.
The city or the culture you were in?
The culture I was in, yeah.
Okay. I just think of Portobello Road on a Saturday morning when I think of the 60s in London. I mean, it hasn't changed much, right?
It's gotten a lot bigger, but it hasn't changed in that respect. But it's 3 times as long as it used to be.
Okay.
Was All Saints Road a really rough place, a really tough place, and were there drugs there, and was it,
Well, I opened my shop there before it became crack dealing and all that sort of stuff going on in All Saints Road. Okay. But it was a really cheap place. That's why I got a good corner shop there. But I used to be, right next to me was the Mangrove Restaurant, owned by Frank Critchlow, who was the leader of the Black Power movement at the time. And he used to meet with his buddies in a beat-up old Jaguar, which was the only safe place to plot and plan, in front of his restaurant. And I was, part of the counterculture. So my friends would all talk about fashion and music and stuff like that. But Frank and I would get together and we could talk shop. We could both talk restaurant to each other, which was always fun. But his restaurant used to get busted regularly by the police, totally harassed.
Really?
Just because of who he was, yeah.
Because of the movement they were in.
Did you ever get any of that because you were kind of, I'm guessing, hippie is probably the closest word, but I mean, did you ever get resistance from the authorities or from police?
Well, not at that level. They did come into our shop, to my shop next to the Mangrove restaurant once, and they were being really bureaucratic and annoying, and then they apologized to me and said, "Sorry about this, Mr. Sams, but we've just been next door, haranguing this guy, and they're going to think we're being prejudiced if we don't do the same to you."
Wow, okay.
But our problem was really with the trading standards officers, people like that, because they didn't like this natural food. It was stuff they weren't familiar with. So we always had a little bit of a hard time with them, but it's just the cost of doing business, and we got through that.
It's crazy that like now the Whole Foods movement, they're opening on every store, and people are like, "Look, Whole Foods," and like I'm guessing Gregory's like, well, "We were doing this like 40 years ago." Is that frustrating, or are you just?
No, for me, one of the payoffs of all my work is I can go into my local supermarket now and get organic stuff. I mean, that was just so unthinkable even 30 years ago. So no, I just love to see that moving out. It's fantastic.
Wow.
Abundance mentality.
Yeah, no, that's true. It just must be weird because like the last 10 or 20 years, it seems like maybe the last 10 years, people are celebrating a lot of things that were happening in the hippie generation in the 60s. And it seems like it's almost a second wave. Do you agree with that?
It is, and it's such a shame that it didn't really take off in the 60s, but the sort of iron foot of the status quo really stomped on the 60s, particularly shooting the students at Kent State and banning LSD and the other drugs that were sort of the engine of the 60s.
Was that, or do you think that the movement wasn't sustainable at that intensity, at that time?
It was.
Do you think you have to charge the gates a few times of the castle before you get through?
Well, a lot of the early people charging the gates said, "Screw it, we're just going to move to the country and set up our own self-sufficient community in the country," rather than keep battling and risking prison and that sort of stuff, particularly in America. But I mean, the 60s, if we had let it continue and acted on some of the understandings and insights that people were having in the 60s, we would not need terms like global warming and carbon footprint and all of that today. The world has really hurtled downhill a lot further than it was in the 60s when the early people were seeing what was going on. And it kind of reminds me of a phrase that Barry Commoner once informed my brother and I. Barry Commoner is the guy who the scientist, single-handedly stopped atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. And he gave us a great lesson. He said, "You can always spot the pioneers by the arrows sticking out of their backs."
That's awesome.
Great line.
We were cognizant of that, so as we progressed, it was a good lesson to have, actually.
Isn't it crazy they used to do that? They used to nuclear test, like,
In
blow
the-
away islands. You know why a woman's bathing suit is called a bikini?
Because of the Bikini Atoll.
Is it because the Bikini Islands in the Pacific, where they were literally like blown out of the water by U.S. nuclear experiments?
Insane. It's
Crazy.
I think, I was listening to another podcast, Psychedelic Salon, listening to a talk by Timothy Leary, and he was like villainized by the U.S. government. And if you listen to what he's saying, it's so progressive. He was just talking about expanding your mind and maybe using psychedelics or a little bit of weed. And the guy was thrown in jail and harassed and tormented for years. I mean, I don't see that happening too much these days, right? That doesn't really happen, does it? Or am I confused?
Well, there's not much LSD about anymore. It's not talked about much. Ayahuasca is creeping in.
Yeah. And mushrooms are making a bit of a comeback.
Comeback, but Timothy Leary was regarded as really dangerous, and I think you can kind of understand it when the people in control see kids going up and sticking flowers in gun barrels at protest. It scares them, because what do? How do you deal with this kind of mentality? And it just scared the hell out of them.
Do you think ayahuasca will, and psilocybin or magic mushrooms, do you think they'll reach a point where the government will step up its crackdown on them and they'll become the LSD of our generation?
I really hope not. And ayahuasca, it's done in a much more contained setting with a shaman. It's not something you can just take on your own, I don't think. I think you need to be in that more controlled setting. So
it's much more acceptable, the ayahuasca experience. And sometimes that bothers me about it, because like sometimes I tell people about my experience and I'm like selling it to them. I'm like, no, it's not in a party. No, I throw up and have a horrible night. And then I think to myself, why am I trying to pitch this as a bad thing in order just to get it by your front lines? What's wrong with a tab of acid that's going to just take you right there? Why are we apologizing? I don't know.
It's because
what do you think about that?
I mean, there's a CIA website on drugs, and when they get to LSD, they're very straight about it. They say it's not addictive, it's not a problem, and they have quite an insight into what it is. But
to be fair, LSD can fuck you up properly, though. I mean,
because you can take some heavy doses without knowing it.
Well, I mean, there's countless stories of. I knew a guy in high school. He took LSD and he was just cooked afterwards. Literally, I mean, I think he was certified afterwards. So I mean,
of course, this anecdotal evidence does.
Well, I mean, he was a friend of mine.
Like
I can tell you his name. Yeah, like it's so it's LSD is something I'm very, very wary of personally. Have you tried that, Gregory? Can we ask you that? Do you mind answering?
Yeah, I mean, since I was 18, I think.
Dude, he lived in Berkeley.
Yeah, and I've come across 2 or 3 people who have had their lives fucked up by it. I've met hundreds of people who've had their lives messed up by alcohol or pharmaceuticals. You know, it's always a risk when you do some of these things. But so many people, whether it's Francis Crick discovering the DNA molecule, or Stephen Jobs conceiving the Apple Macintosh, I mean, it has been such an engine of creation and development, and in the 60s, that is what opened people's minds up to things like natural healing, natural foods, meditation, yoga, because nobody ever used to look inside. It was always the external world, and we were just bodies trying to do it. I mean, the idea of looking inside was an alien concept, and that's so much part of the culture now, even though maybe only 5% or 10% of people are doing anything like that. It's still it's a huge number.
Because the 50s were all about economic recovery after the war, and let's go beat the Joneses, and let's get the car, and let's do all this, and then...
It's very gray world, literally and metaphorically.
Do you watch Mad Men, that show from the States? Okay, they're back kind of in the mid-60s, but it's weird just because you see like them dealing with LSD is brought up, them dealing with like race relations and all this weird stuff. And it's weird to see like, it's almost like people today dealing with like ayahuasca. It's like almost everyone's going through the same cycle of discovery.
God, I love that show. It's amazing.
It's a good show.
Hey, Gregory, I wanted to speak to you about your book, Son of God, because as I mentioned before the show, I read it a few years ago, and it completely altered my perception of reality. So one of the basic premises of the book is that the sun, our sun, is an actual sentient being that is going through its own journey. Is that correct? And can you expound on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, that's a realization I had in Berkeley in the 60s, in fact. Very powerful realization that the sun was a conscious entity. I never did anything with that other than appreciate sunsets and sunrises more. There was no place to hang it, no place to bring it up in conversations. It was such an alien concept to our culture. And it was only in the year 2000 that I decided to look into this further and write a book about the sun. And as I started to write that book, it was an incredible journey, because I just found out how much the scientific evidence supports that viewpoint, which I had never realized, the connections. And obviously, if the sun is a conscious entity, that applies to all the stars. And this was the default mode 2,000 years and beyond.
Are you saying that people 2,000 years ago just naturally assumed that the sun was a conscious entity?
It was an automatic, natural assumption that you made. And even though they didn't know the mechanics of photosynthesis, they didn't realize that our lives are powered by, or the actual energy of life is recycled sunlight, our bodies are made from recycled star dust, they still recognized it was a conscious entity. And the only reason, it wasn't science that taught us this was some primitive, ignorant idea, it was the Christian church that banned people, burned them, whether they're scientists, scholars, or whatever. I mean, they just branded this as pagan. It was the biggest competition. And they did a very effective job of burning this out of our culture. So much so that when I took my book into the Atlantis Occult Bookstore outside the British Museum, the owner, Geraldine there, she was just so happy. She sort of clasped her hands. And then she said, we've got this many books in here on the moon, and we haven't got a single book on the sun, which was once the most widely worshipped deity on the planet. For centuries it was.
Yeah, but we also used to think that the sun revolved around the earth, thousands of years ago.
That the earth was flat as well.
Yeah, that's true. And some people would say the sun is one big fusion reactor, converting hydrogen into helium and just giving out energy.
Yeah, that's what we believe, and what probably does happen at the core. But how did that come about, and how is it that this fusion reaction that's converting 5 million tons of matter every second into energy doesn't create an explosion that blows away the whole solar system? It's got a ring around it, the radiative zone, which is outside of the core, which is the diameter of 26 Earths. And the density of gold, that's holding the reaction in. And there are 5 more layers, visible and invisible, outside of that. It's a very complex organism. And in the visible, the kind of hard part of the sun, some of those layers rotate around each other at different speeds. We have a magnetic portal. This is something that I found was discovered after I wrote the book by NASA. There's a magnetic portal connecting sun to Earth, which is the diameter of Earth. And it goes from Earth's magnetic field to the sun's corona, which is its magnetic field. And these 2 bits of the portal join together every 8 minutes, and tons of high energy particles pass back and forth.
So the Earth and the sun are communicating with each other?
Well, they're in constant contact. There's quite a few. They've since discovered other electromagnetic fields leading from the sun's corona to Earth. But this magnetic portal, at NASA, they say they would never have believed this thing existed until their satellites discovered it. The sun is also connected to other stars by electromagnetic fields.
And what makes this different than physics? Because I might say, well, the only reason we're observing this in our solar system is because we are orbiting and we are at a state of somewhat static beings between these things, and that's why we observe these beautiful attributes of physics. But are you saying it's a sentient being on top of that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, can you, if I'm playing devil's advocate, can you explain how, as opposed to just laws of physics that keep these things in check?
Well, the basic behavior of stars, I mean, the other aspect of stars is that they live as couples. Almost all stars are what the scientists, astrophysicists call a binary system. But they live as pairs. The sun is very possibly paired with Sirius as a long-distance partnership. These couples travel through the galaxy together. They spin around each other. They exchange gases with each other. Stars live in communities of hundreds, thousands, or 5 or 10 million, called clusters. As I mentioned earlier, they're all connected by electromagnetic fields, stretching, light years across space, hooking stars together. Now, is this an accidental phenomenon? Because everywhere else we see electromagnetic fields, which are sort of photon-based. We see them in plants that connect to each other, and bacterial colonies connect to each other, communicate with photons. Our cells communicate with photons. We use them to get X-rays, MRI scans, to send radio, to send television signals up to each other, through the air. All of our smartphones feed off of photons, and we think, okay, well, stars are connected, but this is just like us belching after a heavy meal.
So we just assume.
We assume it's accidental because the idea of stars being conscious has been, if a scientist, if an astrophysicist comes out and suggests that, they're out of a job, they've lost.
Yeah.
You can't go into that area.
What spoke to you about the book? Because you're not into astrology per se. You never mentioned it to me.
Becoming more so, man. Like, I mean, I definitely believe that when you pick up the newspaper and read the astrology column, that is 99% total bullshit.
Okay.
But I think that there is something to astrology. The basic tenet that I agree with is that it's a Gnostic term which states "as above, so below," which is that we are just reflecting the cosmos, human beings. Like, for example, our sun. If it's my understanding that our sun is a relatively adolescent star.
We think it's halfway through its lifespan.
Okay, let's say so. So if you think of our sun as a 35-year-old man or a 35-year-old woman or whatever you want to call it, and it's on its own journey, right? It's in the galaxy or in the universe, learning and exploring and experiencing creation the same way we are, but using a completely different set of. I mean, we have a body where the sun has the nuclear reacting fields and everything you just mentioned earlier. And I know it sounds incredibly out there, but my instinct tells me that is what's happening.
Yeah, but as humans, we always like to transfer all of our human emotions on objects and animals and pets and things, and I don't buy it. That's just me.
Fair enough.
So is it not just us projecting and trying to fit our own selves into a universe that is physics or not?
Well, we're not doing that.
Okay.
I mean, this hasn't been done for 17 centuries. Nobody has been trying to do that because we haven't been allowed to. But as a default mode, we did. But then I ask you, what is the energy of life? What is consciousness? I mean, science is still debating the nature of consciousness and even whether we have consciousness.
Yeah, that's
There's
true.
the argument that everything we think and do, this entire interview, was determined by the arrangement of particles at the Big Bang. Now, does that make sense to a rational mind?
Consciousness, I don't think will ever. I mean, consciousness in itself is hard to prove.
Yeah, but
and it never will be, will it? Because we're all observing ourselves and we're in our own consciousness.
But it is some sort of an invisible field. It's not actually part and parcel of our physical body.
Yes.
And it is sunlight being recycled as the energy of life. And that's purely scientific statement.
Right, because we wouldn't be here without the energy of the sun, is what you're saying.
Well,
So hence our consciousness is a consequence
not even we wouldn't be here. We are actually recycling sunlight as the energy of life. And, it's been stored in plants or the animals that eat the plants. That's what that energy is. It's stored sunlight. And so the sun itself. So we have some sort of a field we don't really understand that is that life energy. Well, the sun has its corona, which is an electromagnetic field that takes up 3 or 4 times the volume of the sun itself. We only see that during a total eclipse of the sun. Now, solar scientists say that the corona of the sun manages and directs solar flares, coronal mass ejections, sunspots, and coronal filaments. These are 4 varying aspects of solar behavior, and nobody quite understands, but we're well aware of them. And they say that they actually say the corona manages all these. You ask them, well, what do we know about the corona? Oh, that's the most mysterious aspect of the sun. But it's managing these random, not random, they're all coordinated. We now know that all of those 4 features are act in a synchronized manner because we have satellites looking at the other side of the sun as well. So that just it kind of speaks to me that it's not mechanical, it's not predictable. This corona is also the one that has the magnetic portal connecting to Earth. It's got electromagnetic fields connecting to other stars. There's a whole sort of community of the original life forms of the universe out there.
What's been the reception to your book? What do people say? What do scientists say? What do other non-scientist people say?
People who read it get very, very transformed by it. They actually recognize what, it just makes so much sense to them. They keep saying, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? I get lots of emails and communications from people just ranting about how it did change their life. And speaking of astrology, Jonathan Kainer, who's this country's most well-known sun sign astrologer, listened to one of my lectures And he went and took the microphone afterwards and said, you know how you hear about some people going to a party and they take a pill or something and it changes their life forever? Well, I just took that pill listening to Greg's lecture, you know, because here he is, he's been doing sun sign astrology, and he never thought maybe the sun is conscious, maybe that's got something to do with what astrology is about.
What blows my mind more than anything is if the sun is conscious, right? There's this video on YouTube I watched which shows the size of the sun relative to the other stars, the known stars, and I mean, it's tiny, like compared to
Betelgeuse and
Rigel or Betelgeuse. It's a literally tiny little thing. And imagine, like in some far-flung galaxy, a planet similar to Earth floating around a star 1,000 times bigger than our own. You know, think of how complex all the systems would be around a far more complex sun. So that planet might be way more sophisticated than Earth is. And the beings living on that planet might be way more sophisticated as well, which I find very interesting.
Wow,
I mean,
that's really trippy.
But those giant stars only live sort of 5-10 million years.
Okay.
So they may not have the time.
Oh, I see.
I mean, they're much more short-lived. But the sun is not a tiny, it's an average-sized star.
Average size.
But there are giants out there.
Do you address the Big Bang Theory in your book at all? Or what are your thoughts on it?
I refer to it.
We had,
it is a theory.
Right.
And it's just based on rewinding the universe backwards and assuming it was a steady progression of expansion. And it is, I heard the Rupert Sheldrake referring it to as if you give me one miracle, I'll explain it, which is a great way of
He's quoting Terence McKenna and saying,
As I put it in my book also, you know.
Just to paraphrase Rupert.
We still don't know who shot JFK. When we have a lot of evidence now, there's less evidence to hand about what was there before time and space, matter and time and space came into being.
I don't believe for a second that scientists know how this universe came into existence.
Just to paraphrase what Rupert said, if people didn't watch Rupert's episode, I think Terence was quoted as saying that if you'll believe the theory of the Big Bang, then you can believe anything. He said something like that. It was almost the most preposterous thing. And then you hang the rest of your scientific theory on this
Give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest.
That we don't know if it existed. Of course, you have to start somewhere, I guess.
For sure. What do you think happened, Brian?
I mean, when you read about the Big Bang, you can read Stephen Hawking's, I think it's a short history of something. It's called Time, and he walks you through these micro milliseconds in the beginning of the Big Bang. I mean, it sounds like, it just sounds crazy, you know? It all started from nothing, and then this happened, and this happened. I mean, if you do take a look up at the sky, and you start looking at what's going on up there, it is really hard to get your head around it. And I can also see, if you were taught as a young kid that this is the way it works, that you adopt that, and then when you hear new ideas like Gregory's, your first reaction is, that's nonsense, because they told me when I was a kid that this.
A few
Especially something you can't get your head around, like those things where you can't see them, you know?
It's hard to believe that all the matter in the universe was once compressed into a space smaller than an atom. That is really very hard to take on board. But
even with LSD, that's hard to get your head around.
But how I address it is that if you look at matter and energy, and they are exchangeable through E equals mc squared, energy is just a vibration. It doesn't actually need any place to exist because it doesn't take up any space. So energy could exist without space or time.
That makes sense.
Because energy traveling at light traveling at the speed of light is everywhere at the same time. So if you had energy existing and then condensing into matter,
so you're saying it's plausible.
So it could have been a big whoosh instead of a big bang, because we referred to our bang as the biggest bang we have is a nuclear explosion when matter is being turned into energy. If you had energy being turned into matter on some enormous scale, that could have been the starting point of the universe.
That already sounds better to me.
That sounds crazy. All right, I got to downshift here because Gregory's here. Also, one of the reasons I'm glad he's here is because I do believe he's a capitalist as well, and I want you to talk about the Vegeburger, and it's something I think you introduced in 1982 and tell me if I'm wrong. And it's weird because your name is associated with this invention, but yet obviously you're so much more than this just invention. But I thought we should ask, what is the Vegeburger? What happened with it? And can you tell us the story?
Well, first of all, I would just minor correction. I much prefer the term free enterprise to capitalism.
Okay, cool.
They
I'd sneak that one in.
They might be synonymous.
Okay.
But free enterprise is for me what it's about, just the freedom to go out and do things.
What's the difference between that and capitalism?
Capitalism is focusing on capital, on making money, nothing more.
Okay.
Free enterprise is focused on letting people free to go out and do things, exchange goods with each other, all of which involves making money, exchanging things, but it's not within this make money consumerism scale.
Okay.
And the Vegeburger, speaking of capitalism, came about.
Free enterprise.
Came about because I was running a large natural food company at the time, Harmony Foods, Whole Earth, and
had it gotten bigger by this point? Because you had started in '69.
It was really big. I had a huge warehouse, hundreds of tons of food coming in and out every week, going out of it every week.
So the demand had risen.
Oh, massively, yeah, massively. And I was still an old hippie, just trying to run this whole thing from my seat in my pants. And we needed something to save the company because it wasn't doing well. We were getting people breathing on us. And I came up with the Vegeburger for that reason. I wanted a product that nobody else could just copy, because after you introduce people to brown rice or sesame seeds, it takes money and leaflets and working on that and telling them what to do with it, but there's no brand loyalty.
Right.
So anybody else can jump in and do it. Well, with Vegeburger, I came up with a word, so I trademarked it so nobody else could call anything a Vegeburger.
Nice.
I had a secret formula, and I manufactured it in such a way that not even the manufacturers knew what the formula was at first. And there was a real market for it. I was peed off with people coming out with alternatives to stuff that cost more. Because we were always going, you need 10 pounds of grain, of vegetable protein to make 1 pound of meat protein. In the case of beef, it's less with chicken.
Right.
What a waste. And then people come out with vegetable protein stuff, and they're selling it for more than the meat. So the point of the Vegeburger, when I came out with the Vegeburger, it was in a packet, it was 69p, made you 4 burgers, which was cheap even in 1982.
Okay. Same price with ground beef, or?
Cheaper.
Cheaper.
And I really worked at it. I worked 6 months getting the product, trying every type of dried onion, every ingredient in there was really vetted.
What was in it? Or can you tell us?
Yeah, sesame seeds, rolled oats, wheat protein, soya protein.
Soya, okay.
But soya was the 4th ingredient.
Okay.
And then dried onion, dried tomato, spice mix, stuff like that.
They taste good?
They tasted really good, yeah. Because I'm very into taste and flavor and quality. I'm not a food chemist. I'm a chef, if you like. So yeah, they tasted good, and they were a big hit. I mean, people thought I was crazy, though, even in the natural food trade, because there's no market.
Sounds a little crazy.
There's no market for this, Greg. And I ended up leaving Harmony Whole Earth and setting off on my own to run Vegeburger out of a spare bedroom, and as a virtual company with other people doing the mixing, the manufacturing, the packaging, the distribution.
I didn't even know virtual companies existed back then.
I didn't know the term.
Yeah.
This was just, I was in my idea of how to save Harmony Whole Earth. I conceived this as something that wouldn't involve any extra overheads, any extra staff and stuff. And our investors and our bank and our accountants all thought Vegeburger, Schmegeburger, 95% of new products fail. We want hard action. So I said, well, okay, I'm going to go with the Vegeburger. Yeah. And it was brilliant. It worked really well. That's cool. It was soared. And there was a huge sort of black hole of people out there who were vegetarian and had nothing to eat. And I got letters from one letter I remember was from a girl in Scotland. He said, I became vegetarian 6 months ago. I've eaten nothing but pizza since. Thank God for Vegeburger. Send me a recipe leaflet. Wow. It was very...
and did you distribute this all over the world? I mean, it made it to the States and everything.
All over the UK.
Okay, UK.
A little bit of export, but after 6 years, it was doing really well, and I could see that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Peter Principle, where you rise to the level of your own incompetence.
No, I'm not.
That's interesting.
Can you explain that just quickly?
It's Well, I experienced that previously, in a business you keep saying, oh, I can do this too, I can do this too, and you keep scaling up, and then you get to a point where, no, you can't do that. And you've already made the commitment to do it, and then things go down.
Okay.
And like with Harmony Foods Whole Earth, by the time I had a huge big warehouse, lots of staff, I just couldn't quite keep a handle on everything.
You weren't the guy to be able to take that business forward?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. You were the creator guy, not the...
And I could do quite a bit of the entrepreneurship. But when Vegeburger got to that point, when I was having to negotiate with supermarkets who wanted to spend £7,000 on a page in their in-house magazine or throw me out, and I'd have to call their bluff and say no. It was just too much.
Okay.
So at that point, I started looking around for buyers, and rather than say, oh, I can make this up and worth hundreds of millions and take that risk. So I got out of it in 1988, which was good, and then
Smart move. Or was it a smart move in retrospect?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm really happy because my life sort of changed from then. I didn't go back in the food industry. I retired for 2 years. Took an advance installment on my retirement, had a lot of fun. Then I discovered chaos theory, which led me into opening up a shop. I've got to open the first shop in the world dedicated to chaos theory, and I was like racing to do it. There's nobody chasing me on it.
You couldn't make this bio up, Gregory. I mean, seriously. I mean, you kind of seems like you're a guy that just explores what he wants to explore and then moves on to the next thing that's interests you and then moves on to the next.
I guess, yeah.
Most people are afraid of doing that, afraid of giving up something that was your passion, like Vegeburger, not to mention your business. I mean, do you ever get fearful about these decisions?
No. One of the lessons my father gave me some good lessons when I was growing up. And one of them was keep off the beaten track. And that just seemed like an obvious, desirable thing to do when I was a kid. But of course, most people don't do it or there wouldn't be a beaten track.
Yeah. And that's rarely evidence you get. That's rarely advice you get from your parents.
Yeah. And people after Vegeburger was a success, people would say, God, that was really courageous, Greg, going out and doing that. And I thought, well, the guy who tries to come out with a new variety of cornflakes is courageous because he's charging up a hill that's heavily defended.
Right.
Oh,
There was nobody defending Vegeburger. There was no competition. I could just go and do it. So that seemed easier to me than doing something that everybody else is doing.
That's cool.
Same with the Chaos Shop, selling fractal posters and cards. And
Same with London Real, right?
Yeah, I guess so, in a weird
there
way.
You go, yeah.
What had fractals always been in your mind, and what was that whole business about?
Well, when I discovered chaos theory, I had a course talking about free enterprise from the Free Enterprise Institute I took in the 70s, which taught me about the power of freedom and the non-power, if you like, or the dangers of coercion, because all the governments run, coercively based.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's top-down control. Every government in the world, it operates on the principle of coercion. It's do this or we're going to damage you somehow. It doesn't matter what this is. It could be recycling, being green, or it can be something nasty. But that's how they do it, and that doesn't work. Whenever you sort of do something or I'll damage you as your technique, you get something other than what you were hoping for. And only children, think, you beat people up to get what you want.
Okay.
And not even most children. So when I discovered chaos theory, I saw, well, that's how the universe works. It's self-organization from the bottom up. It's not. Nowhere do you have this one group of trees in the Amazon telling everything where to go. The Amazon, it's the rainforest. Nobody plots where the rivers are going to go, when it's going to rain, where the frogs are. It self-organizes into a harmonious system.
Can you give a brief description of chaos theory for people that just might not know exactly what you're talking about?
It's the recognition that when you have a complex system, and a complex system is something with more parts than you can count, all of them acting independently and unpredictably, you get a harmonious, you get some sort of order forming out of it. Whether if it's in a weather system, you get what we used to have, stable weather systems where the winds would come and the clouds would come at a certain point. Or you get human beings. We have a complex system, and you've got two bicycle mechanics invented the Wright brothers invented the first airplane. Now, they didn't plan, nobody ever planned, well, in 70 years' time, you're going to be able to fly from London to New York and back for 300 pounds. That self-organized out of this complex system known as humanity. And now we've got an international airline industry out of two bicycle mechanics' invention, and that was never planned in advance. It's a miracle that in a city the size of London, everybody, just about everybody, eats every day. And they get fed what they want according to their tastes and what they've got in their pockets. That's a miracle scientifically.
That's capitalism at its finest.
Yeah. It's free enterprise. And so when I found this science that underpinned everything I'd learned in this course about free enterprise, it was, wow, I've got to write a book about this, because the scientists would never go into social organization. That's a no-no for science. Sociology, they don't go there. And I thought, well, we've got to get this message out about chaos theory to the popular, to the people.
And no one was talking about chaos theory much in '88.
No. Okay. And it was, to me, it's just so important, because everywhere we have top-down organization, we've got problems. Whether it's the education system, the health system, defense, our national health system we should be proud of how few hospitals and doctors we have, because we've got a healthy population. And instead it's, we want more hospitals, we want more money spent on drugs, we want more on this, that's the complex, that's gone wrong, because it's not health from the bottom up, it's health from the top down. And of course, pharmaceutical companies come in and take charge. And
so the top down is like it's trying to control the chaos, and that never works?
Yeah, because one butterfly can change the whole system, as we now know. It's down to every single component, every single person. Before I ever heard about chaos theory, I had actually started work on a book, and get very far with it, but it was going to be the fart that started World War III. And it began with somebody queuing for a newspaper in Hong Kong, and somebody in front of them let out a horrible fart. And so bad, they kind of missed the bus, and because of that, they met somebody else.
It's the butterfly effect, basically.
It's the butterfly effect, yeah. Do you know Charles Fort?
I don't.
No, he said something similar at the beginning of the last century. He said, not a ketchup bottle shall fall from an apartment block in New York that will not affect the price of rice in China.
Wow.
Yeah,
you believe that?
Well, it's the butterfly effect, isn't it?
My question is, do you believe in the butterfly effect?
Oh, yeah. The butterfly isn't causing the tornado, but do you know how it came about? It was Edward Lorenz had a weather system set up artificial weather system on his computer. And one day he had to rerun it from a previous point because of a computer breakdown. He keyed everything into the third or fourth decimal point, wind speed, temperature, etc., and then reran the program. And it was the same for a little while, but then it started to subtly alter and alter until he had a completely different system a while later. And the third decimal point was equivalent to the wind speed of a butterfly's wing flap. 1/1000th of a mile per hour change in that little parameter of wind speed affected the whole system.
But most butterflies don't affect anything, right?
Who knows?
Who knows?
He did later on say he wished he'd have called it the seagull effect. Because that would have convinced people like you.
Like me, yeah.
So I wanted to
I have to be honest about my skepticism.
Yeah, go ahead.
With regards to your observations from your time spent studying chaos theory, what advice would you give someone who wanted to implement those learnings into their lives in order to make them practically happier and more content?
I would say just recognize more the self-responsibility that we have for ourselves, because so many people expect the state to take care of them, to keep everything going right and proper. And I think more and more people are realizing that the state is faltering at that. And we have this sort of crazy money supply system now that could completely collapse, and nobody's not going to know what could happen, which is why they're, frantically panicking to bail out banks and God knows what. But to have that self-responsibility and the trust that human beings, that we can do things ourselves, because we are going to be let down seriously if we rely on the state to take care of us all.
I was thinking, that's an interesting answer. I thought you were going to say that you should just leave everything up to chance, and the chaos element will naturally sort it out and organize it. But that's an interesting way to
just take some responsibility yourself and affect that change on a bottom-up level.
Yeah.
Wow, I thought he would have said something similar. Greg, you were born in America, correct?
Yes.
And you moved here when you were 3. Is
That's
that right?
Yeah.
And you stayed here.
Yeah, well, I went back. It was kind of accidental that I went to America for college, Berkeley, California. But after 3 months, I fell out of a tree and broke my back.
Right. We should talk about that for people that are only seeing the upper part of Gregory. He's in a
wheelchair here.
He's in a wheelchair
so
right now.
So he did all of this in a wheelchair.
Yeah. So can you tell us when that was and what happened and what it's like?
It's a New Year's Eve party, 66, 67.
In Berkeley.
In Berkeley. I wasn't on any drugs, but I was dancing in a tree and on a dead branch which fell. And I landed on my back, broke my back, instant paralysis. Wow. And then I...
How old were you?
I was 18.
18, okay.
And then I came back to London because Stoke Mandeville at that point was the only place in the world that knew how to work with spinal injuries. And they were great. And they were really hardcore too, look after yourselves. And there was no sort of mollycoddling or PAs or assistants. They really, even guys with one arm, they decided wheelchairs that you could have 2 rims so you could push both things with one arm. It was amazing. So I got out of there and I was going to go back to university. But my brother, Craig, had planned to open this restaurant up, this Macrobiotic restaurant. And he unexpectedly had to leave the country. He went back to America, and I then stepped in a few months later and completed this restaurant, opened it up.
So you'd been in a wheelchair for 1 year. You'd never...
Not even a year.
Not even a year. You'd never run a restaurant before you were 19 years old. I mean,
so
mind-blowing.
How did it affect you, the injury? Mentally and everything.
As I had become macrobiotic about 2 years earlier, which is an amazing diet, and I was just so full of health and vitality from it, and faith that this would cure anything. So I kind of thought I would be eating myself out of the paralysis. Whether it was going to take me 6 months or 6 years, it was going to be an adventure and a journey.
Okay. So you were optimistic.
I was pretty optimistic about it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's unbelievable.
But then, then I started opening up the restaurant, which led to a shop and everything else. And I never really had the time to devote. You can't just do it, and I didn't even have any spare time then. At one point I was running a restaurant, a magazine, and a shop all at the same time. But I was having great fun. I mean, it was really, really fantastic fun all the way. I still work at, I still think maybe I'll fix it somehow, someday, but it's been a fantastic life. So it's not, and I see how miserable and unhappy a lot of people are, and I'm not.
How awesome is this guy?
That's pretty powerful. I mean, a lot of people would use that as an excuse to stop trying.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people identify so much with their disability that becomes their life.
Right, and that's what they talk about and dwell on.
And I just don't do that. I mean, it's like, I once wanted to have a T-shirt which said "crippled outside," because it's very visible. I see people, I've met people much more crippled than I am, but it's all inside, and you don't really realize how damaged they are.
I wanted to ask you something. There's been American troops that have lost their legs in Afghanistan, and a lot of those guys call that moment their alive moment, because they found that they've started to appreciate a lot of these things in their life that they took for granted. And I was just wondering if that makes sense to you, that kind of mentality. Maybe that didn't happen to you, but when people describe like what would look like a debilitating injury, they seem to take positives from it mentally.
I don't know. I don't think I've done that particularly. I've just
Kept rolling.
I've just gotten on with it.
Just
Yeah, just gotten on with it. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know, where were we? We were talking about, oh, sorry, we were talking about London. Yeah, because it seems like a man like yourself, you could live anywhere. And so this, we live in London, it's London real. And I was just wondering if you could tell us, why you stayed in London and how you've seen the city change.
Well, when I was a kid, we used to go shopping at Selfridges, and my dad would park the car outside Selfridges and we'd go in.
On Oxford Street?
On Oxford Street.
Are you serious?
Well, there weren't many cars, and he'd had because the American government would ship your car over from America, and we had a Nash Rambler, which was green with wood panels on the side. When we come out of Selfridges, there'd be like 6 or 7 people outside just looking at the car, because every other car was black.
Okay.
But I've seen London change. I mean, it's enormously. I mean, we used to live near Whiteley's at one point, and that was the only. It was the best food hall in London. And my brother and I pooled our pocket money one year and 1 week, and went and bought a peach, and reverentially divided the peach because it was an exotic fruit.
Wow.
There was
60s,
and there was
50s, 60s.
that was the 50s,
50s,
but even in the 60s, there was no Chinese, Thai, Arabic, Japanese restaurants in London. There's a couple of Italian restaurants, a few Indian. It's just enormous, the change in London, and I do love London. I cannot bear the CCTVs everywhere. I'm really horrified by that. And I was in America just a few months ago, in the West Coast. I hardly saw any CCTVs in the whole time there.
It's something they kind of snuck under the radar here, and they got it through. And
It's appalling.
But it doesn't happen in the States. But they just kind of put it out there, and then they use it for the congestion charge. For people that don't know London, you pay to drive in the city, and then they track your license plate. But now they have this whole system set up that I don't think would be tolerated in New York or
Probably
LA.
the absence of gun control in America has stopped that, because people just be shooting them out.
That's an interesting thought. That might be true. So you're here to stay in London for a while.
You never know. I've got a really nice house here now, though. I quite enjoy my house, a nice garden.
Do you go to Burning Man on a regular basis?
I only went once. I went in '98.
98. Wow.
And it was one of those things I thought, well, I'm going to come here every year from now on. It was so fantastic. And
It's early days, very early days.
It was, yeah. It didn't seem, though, because it had been going for about 7 or 8 years, I think, at that point. Okay. And it was enormous when I went, which was about 6,000 or 7,000 people, I think. And I thought that was huge. But it's gotten even bigger now. Yep. But yeah, that was a fantastic. Have you been?
I haven't, no.
For all the listeners, you need to get on Twitter or you need to get on the Facebook page and bug Brian and get him to agree to come to Burning Man and do a London Reel with me there.
Oh, yeah.
Are you going this year, or you don't know?
I don't know about this year because you chickened out.
Oh, it's because of me now.
Yeah.
How many times have you been?
I haven't been, but I want to go.
Oh, right.
I really want to go.
Yeah, I know, it's really great.
Yeah, well, Nick's trying to convince me to do some London Reel shows there on the playa.
Absolutely.
But it seems like kind of up your street. What do you do for fun these days? Or what's a typical week or month like for you? What keeps you interested?
I enjoy my work, and I do spend. I was once married, and for 21 years, never really appreciated quite how much my wife did to make life easier. So now I do spend. I love cooking, but it takes up a lot of time: shopping, cooking.
Are you macrobiotic now, or are you very concentrated?
Yeah, macrobiotic is an approach to diet. It's not specifically what you eat. I certainly am.
Could you explain macrobiotic diet a little bit, please?
It's the recognition, first and foremost, that what you eat is integral not just to your health, but to your happiness, your mental state, as well. And then how you approach that, it depends on, through macrobiotics, depends on where you live, but it really is very into eating local foods, in season, a diet based on cereals, pulses, which are like beans and lentils, vegetables, seaweed, soya products, and a certain amount of animal products, but not as a core of the diet or anything. But it's that recognition. So when you let's put it this way, when I was running Harmony Foods, it was very stressful all sorts of things going wrong I had to deal with every day. And very occasionally, because I wasn't, I was vegetarian from age 10 to my late 20s, and then I sort of had to start to include very rarely meat in my diet. So now and again we'd go out and I would have a lamb steak or something like that. And I would notice the next day that when things were going wrong, I'd say, God damn, what's this happening? And I'd get really stressed out and pissed off and what's going on here, instead of just dealing with it. And I could tell that's meat, this is the last thing this animal experienced was a horror, freak, what are they doing to me? My God, what's going on? And those sort of, we share 95+% of our DNA with these mammals that we eat. So, I felt some of the whatever had gone into its system,
Stress hormones
was coming through me.
What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Not as anti as they used to be. I think there's something to be said. I mean, it sounds like Macrobiotic is more also how you interact with the world and being responsible.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, George Asawa, who was the founder of Macrobiotic, really stressed self-responsibility, whether it's for your health, your life. What you eat through your eyes and through your ears is relevant as well as what you put into your mouth.
It's strange that that the macrobiotic diet stresses self-responsibility, because if you think about several of the large patriarchal mainstream religions, they stress the complete opposite. It's like rely on God completely. Don't think for yourself. Just
yeah.
That's very interesting.
The Abrahamic religions, the prophet-driven religions, which are the root of all the wars and strife we have in this world. Wow. It's quite
Do you really believe that they're the root of all the wars and strife?
Not all of them, no, but a heck of a lot of them. Okay. A hell of a lot of them, I'll use the correct term.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah, this it's quite appalling, the idea that the conquistadors went into Central America with, that these native people are worth nothing because they don't appreciate God, and it's really quite scary, the whole biblical headset.
Yeah, Graham Hancock wrote the foreword to, was it Son of God? Or
Son of God.
Oh, you wrote the foreword, I didn't even remember that.
And I just because Graham was in here talking about his next fictional book called War God.
Oh, yeah.
Where he talked,
so excited for that.
Yeah, sitting here, we were like, so I think it talks all about some of the carnage that was going on.
What would happen if we got Rupert Sheldrake, Gregory Sams, and Graham Hancock in the same room?
It would explode.
It would just explode, right?
Do you keep in touch with your peers in the industry? I don't know about peers, but guys like Sheldrake and Hancock, and do you guys kind of have this respect relationship among?
To a degree, but we're all kind of hard at work as well. I see Graham occasionally. I'm not friends with Rupert Sheldrake, but I've sat down and spoken with him a couple of times.
Okay.
Enough to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation.
Yeah. But you when you ask me sort of what I do to enjoy. I enjoy my work.
And what is your work?
Well, at the moment, it's my 2 books. Okay. So I've just done a complete upgrade to my first book, Uncommon Sense, which is now called The Power of Freedom.
Power of Freedom.
Is the state out of date. And it's, again, the power of freedom is how we self-organize. So I've done that, and I want to come out with that as a Kindle, as an ebook, and for £1 rather than £10. So I can get wide distribution. It's very sort of tuned into the whole Occupy movement, what's going on now. And Son of God, I'm working on a audio version of it.
Excellent.
Which is great fun. I love it. I love
If ever there was a guy with a voice for an audio version of a book, it was him.
And I love it when authors do their own audiobooks. It's like it's night and day for me. If the guy that wrote it is actually telling you. It's powerful.
Yeah.
You're powerful, Brian.
Thank you. I just talk. I don't have to write. What are your thoughts on the Occupy movement?
I think it's great. And I also get irritated with their single-minded attack on capitalism.
Okay.
Not recognizing how capitalism has been distorted by the state and how much the state channels things towards large corporations rather than small startup businesses, because it's much easier to tax 20,000 people at once through a large corporation than to try and get the money out of 20,000 small traders, vendors of food on the street corners, people who've opened up restaurants in their spare room of their house, all of which is banned by laws, health and safety. I had a great insight in Marrakesh once. I was sitting at a cafe a few times, and I noticed this kid right outside us on the street, it's about 15, with a pack of cigarettes. And he was selling cigarettes one by one to passers-by. Now, he'd break every law in the book in this country, but over there, free enterprise, there's a 15-year-old kid setting up in business for himself for the cost of a price of cigarettes. I just thought, that's great. So
Moroccans are great businessmen.
So Occupy, I love what they're doing because it's a peaceful, it's a non-violent protest. And after the Hurricane Sandy in the east coast of America recently, they were apparently the guys right out there at the forefront doing aid because they know how to do this. I was very involved with Reclaim the Streets and the road protest in this country in throughout the 90s. And I went to most, Reclaim the Streets.
No, I don't. Can you tell me?
They're a group who were trying to stop the entire planet from being paved over, which was happening at a pace. So they were putting on parties in the streets. And the third one was the whole motorway link-up between Shepherd's Bush and the Westway.
Right.
Do you know that?
That big highway, basically.
Yeah, both sides of that 3-lane highway were occupied in this completely nonviolent protest, advertised months in advance, but they set it up so the police didn't know where it was going to be and didn't until it was already happening. I haven't got the time to go into how they managed to do that, but they had at one end of the motorway, they had about 100 cyclists cycled into it and stopped the traffic and sent it back that was coming the other direction. On the other side, they had a truck full of sand, dumped sand in the middle of the road, and we partied there until midnight. Planted a tree in the middle of the road in the course of it. It was a great sort of statement on, hey, don't pave over the whole world and devote it to car culture. And what I loved was their devotion to nonviolent protest. It was just, because once you get violent, then you're using the techniques of the state. They know how to deal with that. You're on their turf, and forget it. They've been doing that for 1,000 years.
Right.
But the idea of nonviolence, of sort of bolting your arm into the ground, lying on a mattress, and you're hooked in there, and they've got to dig up the whole ground to get you out, or chop your arm off, which they don't do in this country. And
you'd be chopping arms for sure, Brian, if you were one of the...
Oh, definitely.
So that's what I like about Occupy. It's a viable opposition to the state, but I would like them to recognize how much the state manages businesses and how much those large corporations manage the state.
So they're attacking capitalism, and you think they should be maybe focused more on the relationship states has with large corporations?
Because somebody will always have an undue influence on the state. At the moment, it's large corporations go in and they say, make these laws, like the pharmaceutical companies make laws to ban herbal remedies, stuff like that. But at other times, you've had military go in and manage the state. You've had the church running the state. You have family dynasties running the state. As long as you've got this central organization that can take money out of everybody's pockets willy-nilly, somebody's going to get to control of that. And, obviously a lot of them are going to be evil people who are criminal-minded and who will sort of take, the United States of America is run by the military-industrial complex.
So what are your thoughts on that? Do you believe that statement to be true?
I'm a big fan of less government. Big fan, because there's just there's inefficiencies just to start off with. Not to mention conflicts of interest. And like you said, the British are a great example too with NHS, and it's socialism in disguise, really. But I'm a big fan of decreasing government, but it's so hard. Government is like one of the best biological organisms because it knows how to reproduce, and people know how to stay in office and keep themselves relevant.
But it is collapsing. We've seen the whole Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's a question of what replaces it. That we need to address.
You could argue that the Soviet Union can't exist in a democracy. They're having a real hard time with it, and they're going right back to Putin and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's changing. I don't know if government is really gonna change. I hope it does. But
Me too. But I think it's likely to collapse from inside at some point when the money system collapses. Who knows what's going? I mean, this whole European Union thing is very scary, but also very impossible to figure out. It's such a complex setup of smoke and mirrors and fiat currencies that are based on absolutely nothing. You know, you pull out a £20 note and it says, "I promise to pay the bearer on demand £20," which is, it's a piece of paper saying I'm worth £20. That's all it is.
It's a very complicated system.
Yeah, it's very complicated, and that's its big strength.
And a lot of important, powerful people control it at the top, and it's a big poker game as well. I mean, with Greece, it's a big poker game. Whether they're going to try to let them fail or not, and it looks like they're going to stay in the euro for now. But it's a big poker game back and forth between Merkel, and it's all about control, really. At the end of the day, and Germany controlling the EU. But I don't think it's going to collapse anytime soon. I think anyone predicting collapse is just embellishing a little bit. They're living in this world. I think maybe it should collapse, but I think it's going to still tick along in some weird way.
You might be right. I was singing the same tune in 68, 69, saying, "Oh, it's all going to collapse."
That's why we need people like you.
It's still going on.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to know what advice do you have, Gregory, to a 20-year-old listening to this podcast, as far as what they should do in this what might seem like a very chaotic world. We don't know what's happening, and unemployment's really high, banking system, who knows? I mean, what do you tell people?
What do I tell people?
Yeah, they might ask you, what's the point, or do they have any faith in humanity? I don't know. Do you give out advice to younger people?
Yeah, I do sometimes, but it's about kind of mechanical things like changing what you eat, taking responsibility for yourself. The Son of God is very much about recognizing it's not all about the sun. It's about the implications of solar consciousness, which really, once you get that on board, which there's one chapter which really convinces you of that, the rest is the implications of that. And it really comes down to the point that consciousness pervades the entire universe, from every atom to the expanses of wide space. I mean, the electromagnetic force is everywhere. It's what holds atoms together. It's light, which exists everywhere in the cosmos. And that recognition actually tunes us in to our lives and how we live them and how we respect the world around us a lot more, because we need to respect, whether it's inanimate objects or other people or animals and plants. We're all part of a unified system. And getting that into our minds rather than thinking, well, there's us and there's everything else, really does change your life. And it's not, it's not 10 points on how to change your life. It's just recognize what the nature of our lives is, and recognize that the system we're living in will only support us as much as we play a part in it. Not be passive and expect the state to fulfill its promises about our lives or keep paying us when we're out of work. So that's really my biggest advice, is
I think that's big advice.
Self-responsibility.
It is. I think that's big advice. Start with yourself. If you want the world to start changing, start when you wake up and the interaction you have with that fellow human, or all that stuff.
And it does, be happy. Really, what's the point of life if it's not a gift? I mean, it is a gift.
Be happy. He's dropping all this hippie stuff on us.
Yeah. I was just reading yesterday about the Chinese dating match program. This is the rise of capitalism and consumerism, which a lot of capitalism is just turned into consumerism in China. And there's this statement that went into the legend. This guy said, "I would rather be crying in the back of a BMW than laughing on a bicycle."
That sounds so much like you.
No,
was it you?
The Chinese are taking it to a new level over there. Really, they are taking hardcore capitalism to a new level.
Yeah, it's. I just get some.
Why aren't you in China, Brian?
Dude, I couldn't compete with them. I mean, seriously, the consumerism and the conspicuous consumption over there, it sounds like it's on a whole nother level. Worth checking out. The last question I had for you, Greg, it's a question we ask a lot of our guests, is that if you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Gregory Sams and give him one piece of advice, what would that be?
Keep doing it.
We get that one a lot in different forms, you know.
We do, yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've been following my nose and joining up the dots, as Stephen Jobs would say. You know, you never know how the dots join up until the picture has been made.
Yeah.
And the picture is never made, right?
Well, I've had lots of pictures which were made, and I've gone on and I've done other ones in terms of joining up the dots. But I have never really gone for 5-year plans or that sort of stuff, and I've enjoyed everything I've been doing through the years.
Powerful.
This was a black belt episode of London Real.
That's Nick's way of giving you a major compliment.
Thank you very much.
Of all the belt levels. Greg, how do people get a hold of your books, and how do they get a hold of you?
Son of God, S-U-N, of course. Google it, and it's right at the top of the page. Gregory Sams, likewise. I'm the only one you come up on the first 20 pages. Books available through Amazon, through any online retailer has Son of God on sale. Only Amazon has Uncommon Sense on sale.
And your new version of Uncommon Sense will be out when, do you expect?
I'm waiting to hear from my publisher. I would hope within the next few months.
Okay, fantastic. Wow, what an awesome time. Thanks so much for coming by.
Yeah,
even better than expected. I saw a video of him before he came, and I was just like, I already like this guy. I don't know, you have a really cool energy about you.
Yeah,
I don't know, it's real calming and real centered energy that's really nice to be around.
It was a great show.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Anyone listening out there on iTunes, if you want to see what we all look like, we're on YouTube. You can come visit us at channel London Real TV. We're on Twitter as well, and on Facebook. Come hang out. Nick runs our forums on our website. It's londonreal.tv. Join in. Let us know what you're thinking, because it's a total two-way street. So.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed the episode, tweet it out.
Yeah, do that, and if you want to get bonus points, you can go on iTunes and just give us a quick review. We would appreciate it.
Big time.
And there you go. I got nothing else to say. Thanks, Gregory. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Until then,
it's about the journey.
It is. Yeah. All right. Peace, guys.
Welcome to London.
Right, so it's speaking to those guys and trying to see whether there's an educational angle in what's coming there, but then it's also being grounded by working with some real students.
What are your thoughts on cybernetic implants? Do you ever see it going that way?
I think there's some fantastic opportunities with medical stuff there, right? So you know.